Day is the phrase that Elena's using. Front pages filled with last-minute campaigning.
Yes, and remember, this Le Parisien tells the voters, it's for you to decide, and whatever you decide will be the right choice. That's Nicolas Sarkozy they're quoting today on the front page of Le Parisien. Yeah. He faced their voters yesterday, as François Hollande did the day before, of course, a panel of ordinary people who are generally quite impressed by him. They say he's more approachable, more friendly, more down-to-earth than they expected. They didn't necessarily put the toughest questions to him, we must say. They asked him what he does in his free time, and about the hardest political question he got was whether he supports the reintroduction of school uniform, which we don't have in France. It is vital, and he's not actually in favour. But anyway, he tells them that he's a very cultured person, that he reads some of a novel or watches a film every day. Quite how he has time, I'm not entirely convinced he does that. But he also says a little bit more credibly that he never watches television because he's too worried about what the political programmes might be saying about him. And also in that paper, interestingly, they're looking at a new book that's been published by the former head of France's nuclear company, Areva. Her name's Anne Lauvergeon, and she's written a book that might not be particularly fantastic reading for Sarkozy. She says that while he was a good advocate for nuclear power while she was in that job, he also has made a number of what she calls unforgivable errors, and she accuses him of running his government like a mafia clan.
Now, one other thing that business leaders have attacked Sarkozy on is what they call a protectionist economic policy. That's also making the front pages, isn't it?
It is now. Of course, this is something that Sarkozy's talked a lot about. He's promised to install protectionist trade barriers around France to further tax imports coming from places like China so it doesn't damage the French economy. He has said he would act unilaterally on that if Europe doesn't. Now, on the front page of La Croix, they say the French being tempted by protectionism. And they've done a poll where it says a massive 77% of French voters actually back having borders closed to trade imports like that because they say it would stop jobs being outsourced. That's become a big theme of this campaign, of course, not just Sarkozy talking about it. François Bayrou, François Hollande, the far left candidates have all been talking about how to keep jobs in France and stop companies sending them abroad. Of course, for an economically liberal paper like Le Figaro, for example, though, that kind of protectionism is not a good thing. For their front page headline today is the far left puts Hollande under surveillance. But protectionism is one of the things they're talking about. They're talking, of course, about the rise in the polls of far left candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon and their fear, of course, as a right-wing paper that he'll push François Hollande further to the left, and particularly on trade issues. He's one who's extremely keen on forcing companies to produce in France rather than sending their production to China.
Now, this is one of the stories that's come back once again. The French Navy facing questions about a ship full of refugees from Libya.
Yes, we've heard quite a bit about this story, haven't we? It was a ship that almost exactly a year ago sailed off from Libya and then was forced to drift in the Mediterranean for days because it ran out of power. Now, eventually, 63 refugees who were on that boat died of starvation and dehydration. And Libération reports today that while there were a number of boats around in the Mediterranean at the time, no one helped them. Whose fault exactly was it? Now, they reckon that the NATO Mediterranean naval base in Italy did receive a distress signal from the ship. So is it NATO's fault? Did they not transmit it to the boats that were in the Mediterranean that could have saved those people? Or is it the French Navy's fault? Did they receive that signal but then not give it to the boats who were near the struggling refugee ship? We still don't know, but the French Navy is facing some uncomfortable questions over it.
And finally, France, mourning one of its last resistance heroes.
Yes, Raymond Daubrecq, 1914 to 2012, a resistance hero. He's here on the front page of Libération. Inside, they say that while he didn't want to be recognised as a hero, and it's perhaps understandable why he didn't want his life to be defined by that period, because the resistance wasn't just heroic, it was dark and complicated and sombre and tragic, they say. He did also do excellent work after 1945, particularly in his retirement, going into schools and telling young people about the resistance and what really happened in the war, and that was really important, they say.
Elena with the French newspapers. She will, of course, have the international ones a little bit later on as well. Now, it's time for Focus.